Hey seniors, nice to be with you today. This is Michael Scott and this is Seniors in Action. Today we're going to talk about planning your own funeral. Something that needs to be done, something that is much more sensitive if you'll do that instead of leaving those that are left behind with the job of trying to guess what you want for your funeral. Let me give you an example of that. Prior to the time that my mother-in-law got sick and was close to passing away, my wife talked to her about what she wanted in her funeral, and she said, "I don't want to talk about it." And my wife's reply is, "Well, that's awfully selfish because you're leaving us," and specifically my wife, with the job of trying to guess what she wanted. And so she did come down and, she told my wife a few things that she wanted. She mentioned a special song that she wanted sung. It was actually an Elvis Presley song. She mentioned who she wanted to have sing it. And so when she did pass away, my wife was able to get the exact person to sing it and have that song sung at her funeral. That would have never happened if my wife hadn't asked the question and my mother-in-law hadn't responded to that question. So I, have, in my capacity as a different leadership positions in my church, I've arranged and conducted at least 10 funerals. And when I've gone into the homes of the families immediately following the death, I find that the families are grieving. I also find that those families do not have any idea, for the most part, what their deceased relative wanted. They just don't know. They hadn't talked about it because it's like my mother-in-law. I don't want to talk about that. It's a grim subject. It's a morbid subject in some ways. You've got to really plan your own funeral, plan your own death celebration. So let's go in and talk about this. Your priest or your minister or your pastor or your bishop are going to be able to help with this. The funeral director is definitely going to be able to help you in planning, but without knowledge of what the deceased wanted, what you wanted, or knowledge of your family situation and some of the things that you cared about, they're not going to be able to. They don't know. They need some basic facts. So let's talk about a few questions that will help you. And if you'll write these questions down, I actually have them on a PowerPoint slide at the end of this presentation so that you can look at them in more detail if you want. And if you'll answer these questions and you'll answer them with your relatives, you're going to be a lot further along in most families that I've dealt with anyway. And so these questions are really pretty important in planning your what's going to happen after you check out. So the first question: burial or cremation? Burial or cremation? Do you want to be buried or do you want to be cremated? A very easy question to answer. Most people have some pretty strong feelings about that. Cremation is certainly cheaper than having a funeral service and being buried, and cremation may be required in some countries. But certainly here in the United States, you've got the option of being buried or cremated. So that's a very basic question. Then along with that, do you want some kind of service? Some people don't want anything. I worked with a lady that her husband passed away. We went into the home in the middle of the night pretty much and comforted her when she was grieving, but they had decided that he was just going to be cremated and that's all there was going to be. And so that's all there was, and they were happy with that. But if there is a service, if you're going to be buried, that's a funeral service generally because there's a body. If you're going to be cremated, then it's a memorial service because there is no body there. And that's the only difference between the funeral service and the memorial service from what I've seen anyway. It's just the absence or the presence of a body. You may want a celebration of life, which would be a little bit different kind of service. It would not necessarily be a church service, but it's a nice service. Or like I said, you might not want anything at all. If you're going to be cremated, do you want an urn, and what kind of urn do you want? So that's something to think about. Is this urn going to sit up on the mantle in the house, or are your ashes going to be spread? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But certainly if the ashes are going to be spread, you don't necessarily need as nice an urn as what you do. Maybe you don't need an urn at all. But if they're going to sit on the mantle of the house, well, maybe a nice decorative urn would be nice. And you want a coffin. If you're going to have if your body's there, do you want a coffin? It's pretty much required in a lot of states and municipalities that you do have some kind of coffin, and it may be a cement vault kind of that they put around you, but it could be a pine box, your coffin. As cheap as that, or it could be a very expensive one. I've decided that I want one of these tiny homes that I've seen on TV advertised, because they look like they would have plenty of room for me to get around in if I, ever wanted to, if I come back to life under the ground anyway. So you might think about that. That would certainly be a little bit more expensive. Maybe you want a 350 V8 on your coffin with wheels on it or something. I don't know. But think about that. Think about music, for example. Do you want music at your funeral? If you want a special singer, that might cost some money. They may come in and charge a fee. I've been to several funerals living in Wyoming and being from Wyoming where people have wanted the song "The Cowboy Rides Away." And so as they're ending the funeral, they sing the song "The Cowboy Rides Away." Very cool. I don't think I'll have that, but very cool. I think it was kind of nice, although I think almost everybody has it, so it probably gets tired after a while. Do you want a religious service? Religious songs. If you're a Christian, there may be some very nice Christian songs that you would want played at your funeral. Maybe you want hard rock. I don't know. That's not my thing, but some people might want that at a funeral. Or maybe you're a flower child from the 60s and you want a couple of guys sitting around playing sitars and just relaxed and doing their thing. So think about that. Like I say, some of these might cost you a few fees, depending on what church you're in or who you ask to do the music. Do you want a closed casket or an open casket? Some religious funerals don't allow open caskets. They may have a private viewing prior to the funeral where the family can view the deceased, but in the funeral they do not have an open casket. But there are others that do have open caskets. So certainly there are some factors to think about. If you're an organ donor, it may be best that you don't have an open casket. Certainly if you've been chewed up by wolves or a mountain lion or you've been eaten by a bear, probably don't want to have an open casket. So there are some factors to think about there. A car accident, for example. And then do you want a open microphone or a closed microphone during your funeral? Now the funerals that I have conducted have a closed microphone. That means not just anybody can get up and make comments at the funeral. It follows a program, and when the program's over, the funeral's over. Now there's some nice things about that. One is that you control what's said at the funeral. Other thing is you can control how long the funeral lasts. But you might think that you want an open microphone where people can come up and say a lot of nice things about you, or not so nice, whatever the case might be. And like I say, those can go forever. They can go on forever unless you call a halt on it, and you don't know what people are going to say. So consider that. What kind of clothes do you want to be buried in? Do you want to be buried in white clothing that look like angels? Or would you want to be buried in black clothing? Or maybe cowboy gear? Or whatever. I know my Uncle Joe was a big snowmobiler, and he was buried in his snowmobile suit. Very interesting. I was not there at that funeral, but I would have liked to have seen that. I'm sure that got a lot of different discussions. But that's what they buried him in, and those snowmobile suits can be very expensive. So Interesting. Do you want to have speakers at the funeral? And if so, who do you want to have speak? Let me give you a little experience from what I've seen. Most of the funerals that I've conducted and arranged have had 2 speakers usually, sometimes 3. But at least one of the speakers is maybe a son or a daughter that gets up and gives a eulogy. Maybe it's a friend, which talks about the life of the deceased, your life in this case. And then the other speakers maybe talk about a little bit more of a religious bent to them. So think about that, and maybe you just want somebody that gets up and tells additional stories about your life. But your people that are putting together your funeral program need to know that type of stuff, and they need to know how many speakers there's going to be and who they are. So give that some thought. It could be that you want a slideshow about your life. Maybe you want people there to sit there and watch slides about your life, kind of like they do in some of the marriages where they show the kids growing up and stuff on slides. And you know, my mother, before she passed away, used to tell me that she wanted everybody weeping and moaning and wailing and about her going, and she was just joking, I think. But perhaps hiring some professional mourners would be in order. Maybe you want somebody to just wail and cry and mourn, and I think that'd be kind of interesting. Actually, you might want to consider that. Now, who's going to write your obituary? Think about that. If you've got a responsible son or a daughter, you might want them to do it, or you might want to write most of it before you go, or at least outline some of the things that you'd like to see in your obituary. And along those lines, what picture do you want to have in your obituary? Your children may not be able to find a picture at all of you, but certainly they may not be able to find the one that you want, so let them know what you want and give them a copy of that picture before you decide to check out. What cemetery do you want to be buried in? You know, big cities have got a lot of different cemeteries, and so they need to know which one you're thinking about. I mean, if you bought a plot at a particular cemetery, they need to know that. And as in a small town, there's usually only one cemetery, so you go up to Boot Hill and they put you in the ground, and maybe you've got a plot again, and maybe not. But it's a good idea to let your loved ones know which cemetery you want to be buried in. Do you want a headstone or not? Headstones are very nice. If you want a headstone, what do you want on it? Do you want some carving on it? Maybe some mountains or something like that, or a boat, or in the ocean? That's something to think about. And what words do you want on it? Like, this was the greatest guy in the world, or I'm glad not to have to talk to him again, something like that. So decide that. Maybe you want just a cross, maybe you want a plaque in the ground, but those things have to be decided on so that your loved ones will know what to do. Who's going to put together the program for the service? Now, generally, your funeral director will help a great deal in this area, but they need to know still. They may get the program all aligned. They may align it with the printer and stuff, but they need to know who's going to speak, who's going to sing, what songs you're going to be singing, and how many speakers and who they are. If you're going to have prayers, you got to have decide who are going to give the prayers, and most funeral services do have prayers, so make sure you've decided who's going to give the prayers as well. If flowers are going to be purchased, what kind of flowers do you want, and how many flowers? And certainly there will be some flowers given probably by outside people and by friends, and but if you want the estate to give some flowers, what kind of flowers would you like? Is there going to be a graveside service in addition to the regular service? Funerals that I've been involved in have a graveside service. So you have a service at the church, and then you leave the church and go to the graveside and have a short service there. So consider having a graveside service or not, and let your loved ones know what you feel about that. Will there be a meal provided after the service? The ones I've been involved in, the church has actually provided a meal at their cost for the family of the deceased. And that might mean a meal for 50 or 60 people. And so if that's the case, you need to decide where that meal is going to be, what's going to be served, who's going to do it. And if the church is doing it, that's fine. They usually have a church hall that they'll do it in. But if somebody else is doing it without the church, you may have to pay for a hall, or pay for the church for that matter, to have that church service, and certainly pay for the food and put it together. So somebody's got to be responsible for that. So you need to talk to your loved ones about that as well. There are a lot of times fees involved in all of these things. So if you're going to have, like I say, special music, there may be a fee. There's probably a fee for your pastor or your priest or your minister. And there could be a fee for the church. If you're having it in a church, certainly there's a fee for the funeral home. If you have it outside, well, then you got to worry about weather and stuff, but you could have it at the graveside. Could have it in a park. You could hire another building outside and have it there. But if you have it at a park or something like that, you may need a permit, or you certainly have to schedule it. And if you've got another building, there may be a fee, and that has to be scheduled. So all those things have to be thought about in advance. How long do you want your service to last? Now, the services that I've been involved in, whether it be a memorial service or whether it be a funeral service, they've lasted about an hour. Sometimes 45 minutes, sometimes maybe an hour and a half. But about an hour, I think, is average. But I have attended probably 4 or 5 Shoshone Indian or Arapaho Indian services in Wyoming. Those services may last 6 hours. They may last 10 hours. I think average for them is 3 or 4 hours anyway. And so you may want people to stay there and just mourn for you all day long. But that is something that needs to be considered, and I think it's probably very considerate if the services are about an hour long. I had a Shoshone Indian friend tell me that the white man kind of hurried through their services, but the Indians gave the people the amount of time that they deserve, and they may well have done that, but I still think an hour is about right for a funeral service or a memorial service. Now, if there's going to be donations, you need to decide if there's donations in your name, where those donations are going to go. If they're going to go to charities, put the charity in the program, the funeral program itself, so the people know. And put it in the paper, for example, in your obituary as well, so the people know where to donate to in your name. And it could be a dog shelter, it could be the local YMCA, or maybe the local hospice, but make sure you get that documented, and people know, your loved ones know beforehand where you want that money to go. Now, if you're cremated, you want your ashes spread. Think about that, because if you want your ashes spread, where do you want them? If you want them in the ocean, the EPA says you have to be 3 nautical miles off the coast before you can spread ashes in the ocean. They don't have a problem with you spreading them as long as you're 3 nautical miles away from land. And in order to do that, you're going to have a boat to go 3 nautical miles, and it's probably not a rowboat, so that's something to think about, and there may be costs involved there as well. If you want them in a national park, well, then you may need a permit from the park. You need permission from the park ranger, and he's going to tell you exactly where you can spread them. You can't spread them very close to trails. And there are certain places that they're not going to let you spread the ashes either. So give some thought to that. Make sure that's thought about in advance so you know exactly what's happening there. If it's on private land and it's your own private land, you can spread the ashes with no problem. If you're spreading them, for example, in a city park, you probably ought to have permission from the city to do that. And so look up at the local laws that you have in the area where you want to spread those ashes. But the important thing is you let your family know that that's what you want to have done. So all these cases, what we're talking about is communication with your family so that they have an idea of what you want and what your wishes are, because they're not very good guessers. That's what I found out. And they are going through a grieving process. And one of the last things they do when I get there anyway is have to think about the business of putting together a funeral or putting together a memorial service or exactly working with the funeral home. And just be aware of that. Be sensitive to those that are going to be left behind. Maybe you've got a big estate and you're leaving all sorts of money to those that are being left behind, and you figure, well, they can figure this all out because I'm just essentially paying them to do so, but still, it's a guessing game. So anyway, think about that. Be sensitive to the needs of your loved ones, and appreciate you listening. Give us a thumbs up if you like it. Subscribe to the channel, and continue to be active, stay active, and enjoy life. Thank you very much.